More analysis than Natia Seskuria joins us on the program. She's an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you very much for joining us here, Natia. Now, just moments ago, NATO chief Mark Rutte said that he told Volodymyr Zelensky to fix his relationship with Donald Trump. The Polish president also told Zelensky to get back to the negotiation table. There was initially this big show of support for Ukraine from its Western leaders, but it now kind of feels like some European leaders are in a way suggesting that achieving peace depends not on Putin, but on Zelensky. Is this kind of a subtle suggestion that the EU ultimately is unable to help Ukraine in any meaningful way without support from Washington?
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me. Well, I think Volodymyr Zelensky does have the support from the EU leaders, but at the same time, everybody acknowledges that it is extremely important for Ukraine to keep constructive relationship with the United States Trump administration in this case. And what we saw yesterday was very unfortunate in the sense that this really marks the lowest point when it comes to the relations between the two countries at the time when Ukraine is facing full-scale Russian aggression. So I think at the same time, Zelensky himself also, he had an interview yesterday with Fox News, and he also acknowledges the fact that these relations need to be normalized. And I do think that he will try his best, regardless of this fierce confrontation that we saw yesterday, to somehow deal with Trump administration in a constructive and diplomatic way, if that's going to be possible.
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, Zelensky himself did say on Saturday, to your point, that Ukraine still does indeed rely on Washington's support. But I mean, what we saw on Friday is really just kind of the climax of a series of events suggesting that Donald Trump, the Trump administration, has no desire to continue supporting Ukraine. So are better relations even realistic at this point?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think Trump administration made it clear that they are very serious about shifting policy towards Ukraine. And unfortunately, yesterday we saw how Trump accused Zelensky of gambling with the World War III. So these accusations are quite serious. But at the same time, Ukraine, as you have pointed out, is quite heavily dependent on the U.S. support. So the question is whether or not Europe will be able to sustain the Ukrainian efforts for Ukraine to continue fighting in this war. But simultaneously, what yesterday's meeting showed is that Zelensky is not ready, is unwilling to sign any deal for the sake of keeping these relations as usual.
Do you think that what we saw in the White House on Friday will have concrete consequences on the war, or do you see it as just kind of a symbolic show of force through bullying from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance?
I think there is a little bit of both there. It's clear that Trump is trying to push Zelensky to ensure that he signs the peace agreement as soon as possible. For Trump, it is extremely important to be seen as a peacemaker. And I don't really think that Trump cares much about what sort of peace Ukraine and the peace agreement with Ukraine and Russia will sign off at the end of the day, as long as he will manage to broker this deal. Because J.D. Vance was quite clear at the Munich Security Conference that as soon as there will be some deal, then it will be up to European countries to ensure peace and security in Europe and in Ukraine, of course. So I think for now there is a little bit of both. There is definitely a pressure on Zelensky because he was quite clear that there are limits to Ukraine when it comes to signing the terms of this peace deal. And at the same time, I do think that the consequences will follow in terms of shrinking the U.S. support towards Ukraine, unfortunately.
Now, speaking of Europe, I mean, I think that the problem is that the continent is clearly not united at all. There are places like France, the UK, and Germany that have been quite vocal about their support for Zelensky and Ukraine since the start of the war, whereas places like Hungary, increasingly Slovakia, are clearly opposed to supporting Kyiv. So at this point, do you think that a peace plan that would be acceptable to Ukrainians and both of these kind of divided sides of Europe is realistic?
There are definitely divisions in Europe, but we see also strong rhetoric coming from the European allies, and as well as the actions in terms of as we know, tomorrow the allies will get together in the UK to discuss the next steps. It's extremely important to see the concrete plan in terms of how Europe will be able to overcome these divisions and at the same time scale up its support and increase the defense spending, which will be crucial in terms of supporting Ukraine. But at the end of the day, I think the major stakeholder in these peace negotiations is the United States. Hence, we hear these comments that you have highlighted at the beginning of the program coming from the European leaders, because it is within the interest of Europe and Ukraine at the same time to somehow ensure that Donald Trump changes this hardline position when it comes to putting all the pressure on Ukraine, but at the same time keeping it unclear to what extent they're willing to talk to Russian side in the similar manner, or to put any pressure on Russia to for them to accept concessions.
As a final question for you, Natia, yesterday we heard Donald Trump kind of ramble, in a sense, about past administrations, the Biden administration and even the Obama administration, in terms of why the situation between Russia and Ukraine is where it is today. What did you make of that part of his comments? Do you think that prior U.S. administrations bear any responsibility for what we see today? Or do you think that there's anything that the Biden administration could have done better to achieve peace?
Well, I think Trump really likes to criticize his predecessors in mishandling or misunderstanding Russia. But the real risk here is that he's really overlooking the lessons of the previous administrations. There have been mistakes, indeed. We have seen that from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, each administration tried to somehow normalize relations by accommodating to a certain extent the Russian interests. This has completely backfired, as we know. But Trump is risking repeating these mistakes to a greater level at the same time, because now the consequences of this war is dire, not only for Ukraine, but for the European security and globally as well. U.S. This policy that we see and rhetoric coming from Trump is, I don't think is convincing in any way in terms of achieving the sustainable peace in the future. So this is not really how the U.S. administration should be handling Russia, and we have a hard evidence when it comes to looking at the previous experience that previous mistakes by previous administrations. So to your point on Biden administration, I think Biden tried to keep European unity, but at the same time, the level and the scale of the support that we have seen towards Ukraine has been slow, and in many times we have seen delays that has hindered the Ukraine's ability to counter Russian aggression in a more successful way.
Natia Seskuria, a pleasure, as always, to have you on the show. We unfortunately have to end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.